with witnesses unless through counsel, no contact with the co-defendant in this case, but emphasizing that since Nada works for the former president, that he would only allow that to be contact about the facts of this case directly. Now, Trump's lawyers did make a very forceful argument inside, saying that that would be impossible because many of the witnesses or victims in this case could potentially be a lot of people that work for the former president. As we know, a lot of these classified documents were found at his Mar-a-Lago resort, in the bathroom, in the ballroom, in storage rooms. It was clear at one point that the former president was eager for this to end. When the bond was brought over for former President Donald Trump to sign it, he pulled a pen out of his jacket, signed it very quickly, his lawyers pouring through it. Well, turns out they skipped a couple of pages. That bond actually had to be brought back to that defense table 3 times, so much so that the judge remarked, "Third time's the charm." And then, of course, Walt Nauta not necessarily having a permanent legal defense team there today, and so he will not be arraigned for another 2 weeks. You know, David, sitting inside of that courtroom for such a historic arraignment today, I will tell you, I was just struck by the number of Secret Service in the room, so much so that the first 2 rows behind the former president were completely empty. I was struck by the president's mood. Again, at times, his arms crossed for most of this arraignment. He leaned forward, he leaned back, only glancing at the prosecutors occasionally, but for the most part, his eyes were staring forward straight at the judge. And when his arms were crossed, he was hunched over the table, shoulders were slumped. And David, of course, as we are covering this unprecedented arraignment, one thing that certainly sticks out here is the fact that the judge said the words "former president" before the criminal defendant's name, and of course, in this case, that is Donald Trump.
Rachel Scott, just emerging from that courtroom, we're watching the motorcade now leave federal court in South Florida. That motorcade beginning the journey back to the Northeast tonight, where the president plans to hold a rally. We suspect he will immediately begin to take aim at this investigation, and certainly the charges that he entered a not guilty plea to through his attorney, Mr. Blanche, a short time ago. Excellent reporting from Rachel Scott, and dare I say, it shows that we were on the right track in our conversation up here, because even she described the confusion in that courtroom, the challenge, the initial challenge anyway, if you will, the federal magistrate asking that the former president have no contact with any witnesses in this case except through counsel. And then there was the back and forth, the asking for clarification. The judge did clarify with reference to the case. So that doesn't preclude him from talking to witnesses about, say, other things like a race for the president, the White House, but does preclude him, at least for now, until they can, reconsider perhaps under Aileen Cannon when she takes the case from here. But at least for now, there appears to be in place some guardrails here for the former president, being told that he's not to have contact with witnesses in this case, about this case, unless it's through counsel. Rachel reporting out, and I thought this was pretty interesting because Rachel was sequestered, if you will, because she was inside that courtroom, could not leave until everyone left. And much of her color bears out with what our other reporters were offering to us from the overflow room, that this was a president who wanted this over with, this hearing over with. She talked about his shoulders being hunched over. Interestingly, and Rachel, if you can still hear me, I think this is interesting for our audience, Jack Smith, the special counsel, obviously in that courtroom. We weren't sure if that would happen today. Pierre suspected it would, and he did appear. You did not notice you saw Jack Smith looking at the former president, but you didn't see the former president looking back to him.
No, look, Jack Smith's presence was certainly known in that courtroom. Our eyes caught him, in fact, before we actually caught the former president sitting at the defense table. And while Jack Smith glared at the former president through much of this, the former president never once turned around. I did not spot him looking back at Jack Smith. The former president was allowed to exit first, and then Jack Smith and the prosecutors followed, David.
We know there's 2 federal prosecutors standing just before Jack Smith making the case before the federal magistrate judge. Did you see any contact between Smith and members of his team who took on the roles, at least in this initial hearing?
Towards the end, we definitely did. In the beginning, before this arraignment actually began, Jack Smith was just seated in the first row, his eyes just staring forward. It wasn't until it started getting underway that we started seeing him look at the former president, and then at the end, when The judge allowed everyone to leave. That's when we did see Jack Smith walk out of the room with the other prosecutors and then speak to his team.
Rachel, the former president's demeanor as he left that courtroom?
Stoic, stern. He quickly rose up. He was allowed to exit through a side door. And there was one moment, David, as he was walking out of the room in which he turned back and looked at the members of the press as well as the public that had been seated there. Didn't say anything, didn't utter a word throughout the entire proceeding. He exited, but again, his demeanor, his body language, how stern he was, how restless he was at times, said everything about how the former president feels about today. He wanted to get this over with quickly, and he seemed pretty irritated that he had to come here for this appearance today, David.
And Rachel, one of the other sort of pieces of color that came from the room was the wait in the beginning, that the president was seated for a time, waiting, we were told, up to 10 minutes or so for the federal magistrate judge to enter the courtroom. And we took note of that, too, because obviously as the former president, you become accustomed to not waiting for much, particularly when the stakes are this high. I don't know if you were in the courtroom at that point and you witnessed that as well.
Yes, David, so I was in the courtroom likely for probably about 7 or 8 minutes before the arraignment actually did begin. And I did notice this is when Trump did appear the most restless. He sat with his arms crossed. At times he was sort of swaying. This is when I saw him cross his hands, sitting on the desk, at times fiddling with his thumb or moving his hand behind his ear at one point. He was looking around to see when exactly this would begin, and we were wondering what the delay was as well. Obviously, there was so much security, Secret Service in the federal courthouse behind me. It took a while for members of the press, for members of the public to get in that room and to be seated. We all had to be screened before going in. So that is likely probably some of the reason for that delay. But the former president, again, was sitting there for a period of time waiting for this to begin. And something that you just mentioned, David, this is the former president of the United States. Things typically start when he wants them to start. He's never commanded to rise as he was in the courtroom today, to sit through and listen to everything that the judge was saying, the back and forth between his defense team and the prosecutors. And you could tell that he was ready for this to be over with. He was ready to move on, ready to enter that not guilty plea and get out of the room.
And one last question for you, Rachel, just to give you a break. Excellent color here from the courtroom. Did the president utter ever a word during the proceeding today? Was there ever an exchange with the president and the judge over anything?
He did not utter a single word. Obviously, the judge was communicating to the former president, especially when directing him not to communicate with witnesses or with the co-defendant about the facts of this case. But it was Trump's own lawyer that entered the not guilty plea. It was Trump's own lawyer that obviously pushed back against some of what the prosecutors were pushing for here. The former president did not say anything. But David, I cannot underscore enough how the mood and the demeanor, his body language communicated so much what the former president was feeling. Stern, stoic, at times restless, and he was ready for this certainly all to be over, David.
Rachel Scott, who made her way back down from that 13th floor courtroom, having taken copious notes we could see there for a time, Rachel, and we really do appreciate it because in cases like these and with something of this significance, it's so important to have eyes and ears inside that room, and we were lucky enough to have you there today. So Rachel, thank you. We continue to watch these live pictures, and again, you know, I hate to say that I hope people haven't become numb to this kind of image, but here we are again watching aerial views of former President Trump's motorcade after criminal indictment, this time though on the federal level, 37 counts, pleading not guilty through his attorney just a short time ago. And as we just passed the 4 o'clock mark here in the East, John Santucci, you have learned that there's going to be a stop here for the motorcade. Talk us through that and then where the motorcade heads next.
So, David, I'm being told in real time per sources close to the former president that they are indeed making a stop at a local business. We're not sure exactly what that is. This was a conversation that I had been heard for the last couple of days, that before heading back to the airport, before heading back to Bedminster, there were conversations about getting out there, showing the former president. Because, David, you noted earlier at the start of our coverage, we haven't seen Donald Trump so far today. We didn't see him exit Doral like we saw him exit at Trump Tower. We didn't see him yet board a plane or anything like that. We didn't see him enter court. So a conversation amongst the campaign team is that, look, we need to show our guy once we get out of court. We need to show people that he's tough, he's strong, that he's resilient, defiant. And I think that body language demeanor that Rachel is talking about right now, we have heard he is quite angry for the last couple of days. I imagine, David, wherever this motorcade is heading right now, and we're checking with our sources, that is Donald Trump that we're going to see in some way, shape, or form.
Any way to know yet, John, whether he's traveling alone again on the backside of this motorcade?
I do, David. He is alone in the motorcade. He is just with the Secret Service detail. The cars are manifested in a certain way, so my sense is that that actually held, that he is in the same car by himself with the agents, the lawyers right behind him.
John Carl, former president, by himself. This is surely sinking in, and you have reported, John Santucci has reported, that the president is fully aware of what's at stake here and the gravity of what he's facing.
And the contrast with the demeanor in that courtroom and what we're going to see from him if he stops at a business as they're saying he will, or when we see him tonight when he's up in Bedminster, little mini rally at his golf club. We'll hear the bravado. We'll hear the attacks on the special counsel. We'll hear the attacks on the FBI, on the deep state, all of the greatest hits of Donald Trump portraying himself as a victim. But the bottom line is when he was in that courtroom before that magistrate judge, sitting in front of Jack Smith right over his shoulder, what did he say? He said nothing. He was entirely silent. He had a right to enter his plea on his own. He had a right to speak. He certainly could have looked at Jack Smith. He could have turned around. He could have said something to him. He said nothing. He was silent. His demeanor described now. We've heard from Rachel Scott. We've heard from Olivia Rubin. This was somebody who was clearly cowed, uncomfortable, didn't want to be there. Not the kind of Donald Trump that we're accustomed to.